The lake at Marin Station did not freeze the way the older colonists said a lake was supposed to freeze. It went still instead. On the coldest mornings of the long autumn, the water simply stopped, holding the gray sky on its surface like a sheet of hammered pewter, and the men who ran the pumping towers said you could feel it watching you if you stood too long on the shore. They said a lot of things at Marin Station. It was that kind of place, a cluster of prefabricated domes and greenhouse spines set on the edge of a body of water so deep that the survey drones had never found its floor. 3 years' travel from the nearest world anyone would call home. Jonah Reyes had been at the station for 4 months when he first noticed that the alien woman ate alone. He noticed it the way a young man notices a small wrong thing at the edge of a room, without at first understanding that he had noticed it at all. He was 23 years old, lean and quiet, with the kind of face that people trusted before they had any reason to, and he had come out to the frontier the way most of the young ones came, because the debt at home was heavier than the fear of the dark. He worked the mess hall. He was not a cook, not really, though the roster called him one. He measured and reconstituted and stirred. He wiped the long steel counters. He carried the trays that could not be trusted to the serving arms, and he learned the names of 200 people by the food they refused to eat. The alien woman was not on any of his lists. She had no name he had been given, no dietary card in the rack, no seat at any of the 4 long tables where the station crews clustered by shift and by grievance. She came at the very end of each meal, after the second rotation had scraped their trays and gone, when the hall was emptying and the light had that thin used quality it got when the day was mostly spent. She would stand in the doorway for a moment as if she were counting the people who remained, and then she would cross to the far corner where a single small table had been pushed against the wall beneath a dead ventilation grill, and she would sit with her back very straight, and she would wait. No one served her. That was the thing Jonah could not stop seeing once he had seen it. The serving arms did not track her, because she had never been entered into their memory. The other kitchen hands walked past her table with their trays and their damp rags, and their eyes fixed carefully on some 0.6 inches to the left of her. And she sat with her long hands folded in front of her, and she waited until the hall was empty. And then she took whatever was left in the warming trays, the burnt edges, the dry heels, the portions no one had claimed, and she carried them to her corner and she ate them alone in the failing light. He learned her species before he learned her name. Someone in the machine shop called them the Numa, in the flat way men use a word they have decided to be afraid of. She was tall, taller than any man on the station, and built along lines that made a human eye want to look twice to be sure of what it had seen. Her skin was the color of deep water under ice, a gray so blue it was almost no color at all, and it caught the light in faint scaled patterns down her forearms and along the sides of her throat. Her eyes were large and very dark and set a little wider than a human's, and they had a stillness in them that the men mistook for coldness. She did not blink often. When she moved with a slow, deliberate economy, as though she had learned a long time ago that quick movements frightened the small, warm creatures around her, and had decided never to frighten them again. She was, Jonah gathered, the reason the station existed at all. The Numa had held the survey rights to the lake system for longer than humans had held a foothold on the whole sector, and the arrangement that let Marin Station draw water and heat and mineral slurry from the deep basin had been signed by her people and hers alone. She was the liaison. She was the entire diplomatic and scientific presence of an old and careful civilization, and she had been posted to a human outpost at the bottom of nowhere to watch over an agreement that everyone at the station resented and no one could break. Her name, when he finally heard it, was long and layered and folded in on itself in a way his mouth could not manage. The manifest shortened it, without asking her, to Veil. He tried it out under his breath the first time he read it, standing over the manifest terminal in the dry goods locker. Veil. It did not sound like enough of a name for a person who had been alone for as long as she plainly had. The first time he did anything about it, He did not decide to. That was important to him later, when he tried to understand how the whole shape of the following year had grown out of one small, unconsidered thing. It was a Tuesday, or the station's version of one, and the evening meal had been a stew of reconstituted protein and root mash that had come out gluey and gray, and that the crews had eaten grudgingly and left in quantity. He was scraping the last of the warming trays into the recycler when he saw her come to the doorway and count the room and cross to her corner, and he saw, in the way you see the obvious only once, that there was almost nothing left for her. The good portions were gone. What remained was a skin of cold mash gone to paste, and a single scorched heel of the flatbread that the ovens turned out in uneven batches. He did not think about the manifest, or the machine shop, or the careful 6 inches to the left. He took a clean tray, and he plated the last of the stew that was still warm in the back pot, the portion he had been saving for himself because he ate after everyone, and he cut fresh bread from the batch that had not yet gone out, and he filled a cup with the mineral water she was allowed and no one ever brought her, and he carried all of it across the empty hall, and he set it down in front of her. She looked at the tray for a long moment. Then she looked at him, and Jonah understood that he was being examined by something far older than he was, and that whatever conclusion she reached about him now she would not easily revise. "This is a mistake," she said. Her voice was low and even, and it had a faint doubled quality, as though a second quieter voice trailed a half-beat behind the first. "You have given me your portion. The arms will have already logged it against your name." "They didn't log it against yours," Jonah said, "so somebody had to." She was quiet. He could not read her face because he had not yet learned how, but he saw her long fingers unfold slightly on the table. "You do not know what I am," she said. "You're the person who eats last and worst in a room full of people who won't look at her," he said. "That's what I know so far." It seemed like enough to be going on with. He did not wait for her to answer, because he had learned that the surest way to make a cornered person accept a kindness was to walk away from it and give them the dignity of eating unwatched. He went back to his counters and his rags, and he did not look at her again, and when he glanced up much later she was gone, and the tray was empty, and it had been set neatly at the edge of the serving hatch where he would find it, washed, the cup inverted over the plate the way his grandmother had used to leave a place setting to dry. He thought that would be the end of it. He thought he had done a decent thing on a dull evening, and that tomorrow the ordinary machinery of the station would close over the moment, and it would be gone. Instead she came back the next night, and she waited in the doorway, and when she had counted the room she did not cross to her corner. She stood, and she looked toward the serving hatch, and she waited there instead. It took Jonah a moment to understand that she was waiting for him. He plated 2 trays that night without deciding to. He had eaten early, standing up in the dry goods locker, telling himself it was because the schedule was tight, knowing it was not. He carried both trays to the small table in the corner under the dead grill, and he set one down in front of her. And then, because he could not think of a reason not to, and because the hall was empty and the light was thin and used, he sat down across from her with the other. She watched him sit the way a wild thing watches a hand come slowly toward it, alert to the first sign that the gentleness is a trick. When he simply began to eat, saying nothing, asking nothing, some tension went out of the long lines of her shoulders. "You should not do this," she said. "Probably not," Jonah agreed, around a mouthful of the same gray stew which was no better the second night. "Is the food all right? I made it so I can't tell anymore. After a while I can't taste it." The question seemed to catch her off guard, as though no one had asked her opinion of anything in a very long time. She considered the food with a gravity it did not deserve. "It is adequate," she said at last. "It is warm." "That is more than it usually is." "That's the lowest bar anyone's ever cleared for my cooking," he said. "I'll take it." Something happened in her face then that he would spend a long time afterward trying to name. It was not a smile exactly. The Numa did not smile the way humans did. He would learn. The muscles were not arranged for it, and the meaning was not the same. But something moved behind her dark eyes, a small warmth surfacing and then submerging again quickly, the way a fish rises to the underside of the ice and turns away, and Jonah felt absurdly, disproportionately pleased, as though he had been handed a coin of a currency he had not known he wanted. They did not talk much that first shared meal. He learned that she had been at Marin Station for 11 years. He learned that in those 11 years she had eaten in that hall more than 9,000 times, and that she could not remember the last time anyone had sat down across from her to do it. She did not say this to accuse anyone. She said it the way she said everything, evenly, as a fact about the world, the way a person might tell you the depth of a well. But Jonah heard the size of it, 9,000 meals in a corner under a dead grill with her back to a wall, and something in his chest folded over on itself, and did not fully unfold again for a long time. When she rose to go, she paused at the edge of the table. "Raise," she said. She had learned his name from the same manifest that had shortened hers. On her doubled voice it sounded strange and formal and oddly kind. "Why did you do it?" "The first night. Tell me the true reason and not the reason that sounds well." He thought about it honestly because she had asked honestly. "I think," he said slowly, "because I know what it's like to eat where nobody's looking at you. Not like you do, not for 11 years, but enough to know it's a bad way to eat. And I had a full pot and you had a burnt heel of bread, and the two things didn't fit together, and I was the only one standing there to make them fit." She was silent for a moment. "That is a human answer," she said, and he could not tell if it was praise or its opposite. "It's the only kind I've got," he said. "Yes," she said. "I am beginning to see that." And she turned and crossed the empty hall, tall and slow and straight-backed, and the doorway swallowed her, and Jonah sat alone at the small table in the thin light with two empty trays, and the strange certain feeling that something had begun that he did not yet have the size of. Outside, past the greenhouse spines and the pumping towers, the great lake lay black and still under the early stars, holding the whole sky on its unmoving surface, deep beyond the reach of any drone, and somewhere far down in the cold dark of it, something the size of a memory turned over slowly in its sleep and settled again, and no one at Marin Station knew or cared, except perhaps the alien woman who ate alone, and who had eaten that night with someone at last. It became a ritual before either of them called it one. That was how the deepest habits always formed, Jonah thought later, not by decision but by repetition, one ordinary evening laid down on top of another until the stack of them was too tall to knock over. He did not announce to himself that he would eat every meal with the alien woman. He simply found, 3 weeks in, that he had, and that he could no longer imagine the day arranged any other way. He learned her schedule and she learned his, and between the two of them they built a small machinery of timing that let them meet at the end of every meal in the emptying hall. Breakfast was the hardest, because the early shift lingered over the coffee substitute and complained, and so he began setting aside a portion in the warmer at first light and holding it back, and when the last of the grumbling engineers had gone, he would carry 2 trays to the corner and she would already be there, straight-backed under the dead grill, and the day would begin properly. Midday was a snatched thing, 20 minutes if they were lucky, eaten fast between his cleaning and her rounds at the pumping towers. But the evening meal was theirs. The evening meal grew long and unhurried and became the thing that each of them, without ever saying so, spent the rest of the day walking toward. He entered her into the serving arms in his second week. It took him an hour of arguing with the manifest terminal, which had no field for a person who existed on the station but not on any crew roster, and in the end he had to log her as a phantom line item, a standing order for one under a made-up designation, so that the arms would plate her a portion the way they plated everyone else. When she came to the doorway the next evening and counted the room and saw a full hot tray waiting for her at the hatch, tracked and logged, and hers by right rather than by leftover. She went very still. "You changed the system," she said. "I fooled the system," Jonah said. "The system's not smart enough to be changed, but it thinks you're a person now, which is progress because half the people here still don't." "Why?" she said. It was the question she returned to. Why? As though kindness were a device, and she needed to see the mechanism before she could trust that it would not close on her hand. "Because you were entitled to a hot meal and you weren't getting one," he said. "That's the whole thing. There isn't a bottom to it, Vale. You keep looking for the bottom and there isn't one. It's just the top all the way down." She turned that over. He was learning to read the small movements now, the way her fingers unfolded when she was pleased and curled when she was wary, the faint lightening at the outer corners of her eyes that stood in for the smile her face could not make. "The top all the way down," she repeated. "That is not how my people describe the acts of the small warm species." "The small warm species," Jonah said, "is that us?" "It is what we called you," she said, "before we knew you. It was not meant kindly. You run hot and you die fast and you feel everything at once and you cannot hold still. We are cold and we are slow and we live a long time and we hold very still, and we mistook our patience for depth and your speed for shallowness. It was an old arrogance. I have had 11 years to consider how much of it was wrong. And I am still considering," she said, and the outer corners of her eyes lightened, and Jonah laughed, and the sound of it rang in the empty hall, and she watched him laugh with a kind of hunger she did not know she was showing, the way a person warms their hands at a fire they have been told all their life to fear. He learned about her slowly, the way you learn the shape of a dark room, by putting out a hand and finding an edge and remembering it. She had come to the lake because the lake was old. Her people did not measure worth in the way humans did, in ore hauled and water drawn and distance crossed. They measured it in the age of things, in the patient accumulation of time, and the lake at Marin Station was among the oldest bodies of water any of them had ever found. It had been liquid, she told him, before there was anything on the human homeworld that could be called alive. Its basin went down past the reach of the drones, because the drones were built by a species that believed a floor was a thing you would eventually hit, and the lake did not share that belief. "There is something down there," she said one evening without preamble, and Jonah set down his cup. "Down where?" "In the lake. In the deep basin, below the cold layer where the water stops moving." She was looking past him, toward the wall, but he understood she was looking through it, out to the black water under the stars. The station's instruments have registered it 4 times in 11 years. Each time it was recorded as an equipment fault and cleared, because the men who read the instruments are looking for ore and water and profit, and a thing that is none of those does not fit into the columns they keep. But it is there. Something large, something old, something that moves slowly on a schedule of its own and rises a little closer to the light each time, and no one is watching but me. "That should scare me," Jonah said, "and it kind of doesn't." "Why doesn't it scare me?" "Because you have decided to trust the person telling you," she said, "and I have not told it to you as a thing to fear. My people do not fear the old things. We fear the fast things, the hot, bright, hungry things that come and go before you have finished understanding them. A thing that has waited at the bottom of a lake for longer than your species has had language is not hungry for you. It is simply there. It is patient in the way we are patient. If anything, I think it is lonely in the way I am lonely, and I do not think loneliness is a thing that eats you. I think it is a thing that hollows you slowly and leaves you standing, which is worse." Jonah did not answer that right away. Outside, the wind had come up off the water and was moving against the dome, and the light in the hall had gone to its thin, used evening color. And across the small table the alien woman sat straight-backed and grave and had just told him. He understood more about herself than she had told anyone at Marin Station in 11 years, using a creature at the bottom of a lake as the only word she had for it. "How long do your people live?" he asked. "Long," she said. "Long enough that a posting of 11 years is not a great sacrifice of time, in the accounting my superiors kept when they sent me. To them it is a brief errand. Watch the humans, keep the agreement, return when you are relieved. They did not account for the other thing. They are old and slow, and they hold very still, and they forgot that even a Numa can be too much alone. There are no others of my kind within 3 years' travel of this place, Rays. There have not been for 11 years. I speak my own language aloud sometimes, in my quarters, only to hear it, and there is no one to answer, and the sound of it comes back off the walls at me, and I have begun to be afraid that I am forgetting the parts of it that are meant to be spoken to another person, because those parts have gone 11 years unused." She stopped. She had said more than she meant to. He saw her fingers curl, the wariness returning, the old fear that a kindness shown would be a kindness withdrawn, and that having let herself be seen, she would now be left more alone than before. Jonah did something then that he had not planned and could not entirely explain. He reached across the small table slowly, the way she moved, giving her every chance to draw back, and he set his warm human hand over her long cold fingers where they had curled on the steel. She did not draw back. She went very still, in the way that he had come to understand was not coldness but the opposite, the stillness of a creature holding a moment so carefully that it will not risk breaking it with breath. "Then say it to me," he said. "The parts that are meant to be spoken to another person. I won't understand a word, but you'll have said them to somebody out loud, and somebody will have wanted to hear them. That's the part that's been missing, isn't it? Not the understanding. The wanting to hear." For a long moment she did not move and did not speak. Then she turned her hand over beneath his, so that her cold fingers lay open against his warm palm, and she began to speak in her own language, low and doubled and layered, the quieter voice trailing the louder by its half-beat, and Jonah did not understand one syllable of it and did not need to. He sat in the emptying hall with his hand open under hers, and listened to 11 years of unspoken things pour out in a language built for two, and he understood the shape of it if not the sense, the rise and fall of it, the places where it caught and the places where it ran, and when at last it slowed and stopped, he did not fill the silence, because he had learned that with her the silence after was part of the speaking. "Thank you," she said finally in his language, and it was the first time she had said those 2 words to anyone at Marin Station, and meant them at the whole depth she was capable of meaning them. "You don't have to thank me for listening," Jonah said. "That's the easiest thing a person can do. It's just that hardly anybody does it." "That," she said, "is precisely why it must be thanked." They sat a while longer, until the hall lights dimmed to their overnight setting, and the machinery of the station settled into its low, patient hum, and then she rose, and this time she did not simply cross the hall and vanish through the doorway. She paused, and she looked down at him, and the outer corners of her dark eyes lightened. "Tomorrow," she said. It was not a question, but there was a question folded inside it, small and carefully hidden, the way she hid everything that mattered. "Tomorrow," Jonah said, "breakfast. I'm holding back the good coffee substitute. Don't tell the engineers." "I will tell no one anything," she said gravely, "as I never do," and something in the dryness of it was so nearly a joke that Jonah laughed again, and she carried the sound of his laughter out into the dark with her, the way a person carries a lamp, and behind her the great lake lay black and patient under the stars, and far down in it the old thing turned over in its sleep and rose, that night, a very little closer to the light. The long autumn turned toward the long winter, and the rituals of the corner table deepened into something with a grain and a texture of its own, and Jonah Rays came to understand that he had, without noticing the moment it happened, built the center of his life around an alien woman most of the station pretended not to see. He began to bring things to the meals beyond the food, small things, a story from home, badly told about his sister and a stolen boat and a river that had nearly drowned them both. A question he had been saving all day. A thing he had noticed and could not explain. A color the lake had gone at dusk. A bird the greenhouse crew swore they had seen that no one could have brought. He brought these things the way another man might bring flowers, offerings laid on the steel table, and Vale received them with a gravity that made each one feel larger than it was, and gave back her own in return. Her offerings were stranger and older, and he treasured them more. She told him how the Numa marked the passage of a life, not in years, but in the number of times a person had watched the same slow thing change, a coastline recede, a star dim, a glacier withdraw up a valley over the span of a single long attention. She told him that her people did not have a word for goodbye, only a word for until, and that the absence of the first word was considered a kindness, and the presence of the second a promise. She told him, one deep winter night when the wind had piled the frozen snow against the domes until the whole station groaned with it, that among her kind the sharing of food was not a small thing as it was among humans, but the oldest and most binding of all the acts of trust, because to eat beside another was to admit that you were, for the length of the meal, unguarded, and that you had chosen to be unguarded in that particular company, and that there was no lie a Numa could tell that would survive the sharing of 9,000 meals. You have shared more than 9,000 meals in that corner, Jonah said. Alone. Yes, she said. So by your own people's reckoning, you've been unguarded in the company of no one, 9,000 times. She was quiet. You have understood the thing exactly, she said. That is what it is to be the only one of your kind for 11 years. It is not merely that you are lonely. It is that the deepest act your people know, the act that makes you what you are, has become an act you can perform only against an empty chair. I set my guard down 9,000 times before an empty chair, Rays, because I could not stop being what I am, and each time no one came to sit in it, and each time the emptiness of the chair told me the same thing, which is that there is no one for whom you are worth the trust. And now, Jonah said very quietly. She looked at him across the small table, at the young human who ate last and worst so that she would not have to, who had fooled the serving arms into believing she was a person, who had sat in the empty chair every day for a whole turning season and asked nothing of her but her company. Now the chair is not empty, she said. I had begun to believe that it never would be. I had made my peace, Rays, or I had made the thing that a person makes when peace is not available and something must be made in its place. And then a young man carried a hot tray across an empty hall because a burnt heel of bread offended him, and sat down in the chair and stayed. I do not have the words in your language for what that has been. I am not certain I have them in mine. My language was built for two, and it has been 11 years since there were two, and I am relearning it one meal at a time, and you are the person I am relearning it with. Jonah did not trust his voice for a moment. When he had it again, he said, For what it's worth, I don't have the words either. I'm not a words person. I'm a hot tray person. But I know that the best part of my day starts when the hall empties out, and I know that when I first got to this station, I used to lie awake wondering what the hell I was doing 3 years from anything I'd ever loved, and I don't wonder that anymore, and it's because of you. So we cannot have the words together. That seems fair. The outer corners of her eyes lightened, and stayed lightened, longer than he had ever seen. Not everyone at Marin Station was content to leave the two of them to their corner. Jonah first felt the shift as a coldness in the mess line, a set of backs turned a degree further than the ordinary indifference of tired men. Then it came to him in words, in the machine shop, from a broad, flat-faced supervisor named Corliss who ran the pumping towers and had run them for 9 of the 11 years, and had opinions calcified by the running. You want to watch yourself, Cook, Corliss said, not unkindly in the way of a man who has decided to do a cruelty and dress it as a favor. People are talking about you and the Numa, sitting with it every night. Cozy. Jonah said. and I don't see how it's anyone's business who I have dinner with." "It's everybody's business," Corliss said. "When it's that, you know what that thing is. It's the eyes and ears of a species that owns the ground we stand on and the water we drink and could shut this whole station down with a signature if it took a mind to. 11 years it's watched us, logged us, reported on us, and now it's got a friend in the kitchen who talks to it every night about God knows what and feeds it and dotes on it, and you want to tell me that's nobody's business?" "She's not a spy, Corliss." "She's a liaison," Corliss said, leaning on the word until it bent. "Which is a spy with the paperwork filled out. You're young. You came out here for the money, same as the rest of us, and you'll go home when your contract's up and you'll forget this place. That thing won't. It'll be here when you're gone, and it'll remember every soft thing you ever said to it, and it'll write it down, and someday it'll matter. You're making yourself a mark, Cook. Don't say nobody told you." Jonah carried the conversation back to the corner table that evening, the way he carried everything back to the corner table, because he had learned that there was nothing he could not tell her, and nothing she could not bear to hear. She listened to all of it without moving. When he had finished, she was silent for a long time, and then she said, "He is not entirely wrong." "Vale." "Hear me," she said. "He is wrong about what I am, and he is wrong about why I sit in this chair, and he is wrong to have said it to you as a threat. But he is not wrong that I file reports. I do. It is my function, 11 years of them. I have logged the ore hauled and the water drawn and the agreements kept and broken. I have logged the tempers of the men who run the towers and the state of the machines and the health of the crews. It is what a liaison does. And Rays, if you wish to know the whole of it, so that you decide with open eyes and not closed ones whether to keep sitting in this chair, then you should know that in the earliest years, before I understood you, before I understood anything, I logged the humans as the small warm species logs a colony of animals it is deciding whether to trust. I was not kind in those reports. I did not know how to be. I am telling you this because you have given me 9,000 meals of trust in one season, and the trust cannot be one thing between us and another thing on the record, or it is not trust at all." Jonah sat with that. It would have been easy, he thought, to feel the small cold slide of betrayal, to hear Corliss's voice in it and let the voice win. He found that he could not. He had eaten too many meals across from her. He knew the difference between the guarded thing she had been and the unguarded thing she had let herself become, and he knew which one had written those early reports, and he knew which one was sitting across from him now. "What do you log about me?" he asked. She was quiet for so long that he thought she would not answer. "I do not," she said at last. "That is the thing I have not told my superiors in a year of reports. There is a person on this station who carries me a hot tray and sits in my chair and listens to my language and asks for nothing, and I have not written his name in a single report, and I will not, because the moment I do he becomes a line in a column, a thing accounted for, and he is the one thing in 11 years that I have refused to account for. You asked me once for the true reason and not the reason that sounds well. That is the true reason, Rays. You are the secret I keep from my own people. You are the one warm thing I have not turned into a record. And if that is a failure of my function, then I have failed it gladly, and I would fail it again." Outside, the wind drove the frozen snow against the domes, and the station groaned under the weight of the winter, and the great lake lay locked and still beneath its lid of pewter ice, with the old patient thing turning slowly far below. And inside, in the emptying hall, in the thin used light, a human and a Numa sat across a small steel table and had told each other the last of the things they had been keeping back, and found that the telling had not broken anything, but had instead set the final stone in a foundation that neither of them now would easily be moved off of. "Corliss can talk all he wants," Jonah said. "I'm keeping the chair." "Yes," Vale said. "I had hoped that you would say a thing like that. I did not permit myself to expect it. Hope and expectation are different sizes in my people, but I had hoped." "Get used to it," Jonah said. "I'm a hoping-sized thing. I run hot, remember, small warm species. And he grinned at her, and she gave him the long, steady lightening at the corners of her eyes that he had come to prize above any other thing at Marin Station, and the two of them finished their meal in the groaning winter dark, guarded against nothing, in the company of exactly the person each of them had chosen. If Jonah had ever wondered whether the trust of the corner table ran only one way, whether he was the one who carried, and she was the one who was carried, and that was the whole shape of it, the deep winter answered him, in the way the deep winter answered most things, without mercy and without warning. It was a fever. Something had come up out of the greenhouse soil, some frontier microbe the med-scanner could not name, and it went through the station in the darkest weeks, and it laid men out in their bunks by the dozen. And Jonah, who worked the food and touched every tray that every mouth would touch, was among the first and the worst of them. He remembered carrying the evening trays to the corner one night, and he remembered the floor of the hall tilting under him in a slow, strange way that had nothing to do with the station, and then he remembered nothing at all for the better part of 3 days. He learned afterward what had happened in those 3 days, partly from the med-tech and partly from the changed way certain men looked at him after, and partly from Vale, though she told it plainly and without weight, the way she told everything. The med bay had been overrun. The single med-tech had triaged the crews by rank and by usefulness, which was the cold arithmetic of a dying station, and a kitchen hand near the bottom of both lists had been given a cot in the corner and a dose of the general antiviral and left, because there were tower engineers to keep alive, and a kitchen hand was, in the columns, replaceable. And into that overrun med bay had come, on the first night, the station's Numa liaison, who was not supposed to be there, who had no standing there, whom no one had ever seen enter the med bay in 11 years, and she had walked past the med-tech's objections as though they were weather, and she had gone to the cot in the corner where the kitchen hand lay burning, and she had pulled a stool up beside it, and she had sat down. She did not leave for 3 days. The med-tech told it later with a kind of baffled awe. The Numa had not interfered with the treatment, had not touched the equipment, had asked for nothing. She had simply sat, straight-backed on a stool beside a delirious kitchen hand, hour upon hour, through the station's night and its thin day and its night again, and she had held his hot human hand in her cold, long fingers, and when the fever drove him up out of sleep raving and frightened and not knowing where he was, she had spoken to him, low and doubled and layered in her own language, the language built for two, the parts of it that were meant to be spoken to another person. She did not speak them to be understood. She spoke them because a season ago a young man had told her that the missing thing was never the understanding but the wanting to hear, and now the young man was the one lost and frightened in the dark, and she gave him back the only medicine she had, which was the sound of a voice that wanted, very much, for him to stay. He surfaced on the 3rd day. He came up slow out of the heat and the strange tilting dark, and the first thing he was aware of, before the ceiling, before the ache in every joint before his own name, was a cold weight around his hand, and a low doubled voice speaking words he did not know, and he turned his head on the flat pillow and there she was, gray-blue and grave and unmoved from her stool, and her great dark eyes were fixed on him, and when she saw that he had come back she stopped speaking mid-word. "You carried the chair," Jonah said. His voice came out a cracked whisper and it took everything he had. "All the way in here, you sat in it for me." "Yes," she said. "They'll talk, Corliss, all of them. You walked into the med bay in front of everybody and sat with me for 3 days. You made yourself a mark." That's the word he used on me. You made yourself a mark. "Yes," she said again, and the outer corners of her eyes lightened, even weary as she plainly was, worn to the edge of something he had never seen her worn to. "I made myself a mark. I considered it on the first night in the way my people consider things, slowly and coldly and from every side. I considered what it would cost me in the reports and the rumors and the 6 inches to the left. And then I put all of it down, Rays, and I picked up your hand instead because I found that I did not care what it cost. In 11 years I did not once find a thing I did not care what it cost. You have given me one. It is a strange gift. It weighs nothing and it changes everything. I sat in the chair for you because you have sat in it for me 9,000 times, and I discovered on the first night that I would rather be a mark beside your cot than safe and unmarked in my quarters listening to my own language come back off the walls. That is what you have done to me. I no longer know how to prefer the empty chair. You have ruined me for it entirely, and I find that I am glad. Jonah lay there a long moment, too weak to lift his hand, so she held it up for him, and he looked at the cold, long fingers laced through his hot, weak ones, and something in his chest folded over and, this time, unfolded all the way, warm and whole. That's the true reason, he said, isn't it? Not the reason that sounds well, the true one. You are learning to ask my question, Vale said. Yes, that is the true reason. There is no bottom to it, Rays. You taught me the phrase, it is the top all the way down. He was 3 more days getting his strength back, and she brought his meals to the med bay and ate them beside him on the stool, so that even sick and flat on his back, he did not once eat where no one was looking. And by the time he was up and back on his feet and carrying trays again, something at Marin Station had shifted that no report could shift back. The men still would not sit with her, but they no longer looked 6 inches to the left. Corliss, passing her in the corridor, gave her a short, rough nod that cost him something, and she returned it gravely, and neither of them ever spoke of it, and it was, in its small, stony way, a kind of peace. The alien woman had walked into a human med bay and sat 3 days beside a dying human boy, and the station had seen it, and you could not entirely unsee a thing like that, no matter how the columns were kept. You know what the strangest part is, Jonah said. The first evening he was strong enough to carry the trays to the corner himself again, easing down into his chair across the small table with his arms still shaking a little from the weight. I've spent a whole season thinking my job was to make sure you never had to eat alone, and then the one time I couldn't lift a tray, you made sure I never had to either. I didn't even know I needed that. I've got 200 people on this station, and not one of them would have sat 3 days by my cot, and the one who did is the one everybody told me to watch out for. That is not strange, Vale said. That is only the shape of the thing seen from the other side. You believed you were feeding a lonely creature, you were, but a thing that is fed learns in time to feed. That is the whole of it, Rays. That is the whole of what it has all been. 2 lonely creatures teaching each other one meal at a time that the chair does not have to be empty. I do not think there has ever been anything more to it than that. I do not think there needs to be. And she unfolded her long fingers on the steel table, and Jonah set his still shaking hand over them, and outside the deep winter drove the frozen snow against the domes, and the 2 of them ate in the corner under the dead grill, guarded against nothing. Each one carried and each one carrying, in exactly the company each of them had chosen. The news came in the deepest part of the winter, carried on the tight beam relay that reached the station once a month from the world 3 years behind them, and it landed on Marin Station like the frozen snow off the domes, all at once and heavy enough to make the whole structure groan. The station was to be decommissioned. Jonah heard it the way everyone heard it, in the crowded mess hall at the morning meal, from the station director standing on a chair with a data slate in his hand, and the look of a man reading a sentence he did not write. The mineral yields had fallen below the line that made the distance worthwhile. The accountants 3 years away had run the columns Vale had spent 11 years describing to him, and the columns had come out against Marin Station. And so in 90 days the pumping towers would go still, and the greenhouses would go dark, and 200 people would be loaded onto the supply hauler and carried back the 3 years toward home, and the domes would be left to the long autumn and the longer winter and the patient lake empty, until the ice took them. There was a strange lightness in the hall at the news, Jonah noticed. Men who had cursed the station for years now grinned at the thought of leaving it, and made plans loudly, and clapped one another on the shoulders. Home. The word went around the tables like warmth. Home in 3 years and money in the account, and the whole cold nightmare of Marin Station shrinking to a story they would tell badly at other tables on other worlds. Even Corliss, who had run the towers for 9 years, looked 10 years younger by midday. Jonah did not feel the lightness. Jonah felt the 90 days close around his chest like a hand. He found her not in the mess hall, which she had not come to, but out at the Eastern Observation Blister, the small transparent dome that hung off the edge of the station over the frozen shore, where she went sometimes to watch the lake. She was standing very still with her long hands folded, looking out over the vast white lid of ice toward the place where the deep basin lay, and she did not turn when he came in, but he knew that she knew it was him, because her fingers unfolded. "You have heard," she said. "The whole station's heard. Half of them are already packing." "Yes," she said, "the small warm species, quick to arrive and quick to leave and glad of both. I do not say it unkindly, Rays, not any more. It is only your nature, and it is a good nature for the crossing of great distances, and a poor one for the keeping of long watches. You were never meant to stay by this lake. None of you were. You came for what you could carry out of it, and now there is not enough to carry, and so you will go, and that is right, and I am glad for you." She paused. "I am glad for you," she said again, more quietly, as though testing whether it would hold weight, and it did not entirely hold. "What happens to you?" Jonah asked. It was the question that had been sitting in his chest since the director climbed down off his chair. For a long moment she did not answer. Then she said, "When the station is decommissioned, the agreement that placed a liaison here is dissolved with it. There will be nothing for a liaison to liaise. My superiors will be informed. In time, some years from now, a ship will be dispatched to collect me and carry me the 3 years home, or to my next posting, wherever that is judged to be. In time. My people are not quick, Rays. We do not run hot. A Numa left alone on a decommissioned station at the bottom of nowhere is not an emergency to the ones who keep the columns. It is an item to be handled in its season." "How long?" Jonah said. His voice had gone strange. "How long between the station going dark and a ship coming for you?" "Roughly." She turned from the ice then and looked at him, and he saw that she had already done this arithmetic. In the still cold way she did all arithmetic, and that she had been standing at the blister trying to find a way not to say the answer to him. "Between 4 and 7 years, she said. "It is difficult to be precise. It depends on the dispatch schedules and the priorities and whether anyone thinks to expedite it, and no one will think to expedite it, because I am one Numa and I am very far away, and I am, in the accounting, quite patient." The observation blister was very quiet. Outside, the wind moved the dry snow across the ice in long pale ropes, and the sky over the lake was the color of old pewter, and Jonah Rays stood in the cold light and understood, all at once and heavy enough to make him groan, what the news had actually meant. "You'd be alone," he said, "on a dead station, in the dark and the cold, with the power off and the greenhouses dead for as much as 7 years, with no one, not even the men who won't look at you. Not even the empty chair, because there'd be no hall, no meals, no anything. Just you and the lake and the thing at the bottom of it for 7 years, waiting for a ship that no one's in a hurry to send." "Yes," Vale said. "You'd die," Jonah said. "Wouldn't you, not from the cold? You'd rig the power somehow. You're cleverer than this whole station put together. Not from the cold, from the other thing, the hollowing thing. You told me. Loneliness doesn't eat you, it hollows you slowly and leaves you standing. 11 years nearly did it, and I came along and stopped it, and now you're telling me they want to give you 7 more alone in the dark, and this time nobody's carrying a hot tray across the hall. That's not a posting. That's a sentence. They're sentencing you to it and calling it a schedule." She did not deny it. That was the worst of it, that she did not deny it. That she stood very straight and very still and let him say the true shape of the thing out loud, because she had promised him, a whole season ago, that there was nothing she could not bear to hear. "My people would not call it that," she said. My people would say that a Numa is built to endure, that 7 years is a small span, that solitude is our natural element, and I have merely grown soft in the company of a warm, quick thing that was always going to leave. And they would not be entirely wrong, Rays, which is why I cannot even hate them for it. I have grown soft. You have made me soft. You have taught me in one season that the chair does not have to be empty, and now the state has decided to empty it again, permanently. And I find that I no longer have the hardness I spent 11 years building, and I do not know how to get it back. And I am afraid that without it the 7 years will do what the 11 could not. Jonah crossed the small dome and stood beside her and looked out at the ice, because he could not look at her and think at the same time, and he needed very badly to think. "Come with us," he said. "On the hauler, 3 years home. I'll bunk in a supply locker, I don't care, you're a person. They can't just leave a person on a dead station." "They can," she said gently. "And the hauler is a human vessel under a human charter, and I am a Numa under my own people's authority, and there is no provision in any agreement for a liaison to be carried home on the ship of the species she was posted to observe. It would be irregular. It would be, in the word your Corliss is so fond of, complicated. And when a thing is complicated and far away and slow, Rays, the columns decide it by doing nothing, and the doing of nothing in this case is a locked hatch and a departing ship and me on the shore watching it go. I have thought of it. I thought of it before you finished the sentence. It cannot be done that way. Then some other way. Perhaps, she said. I do not want to give you a false hope. Hope and expectation are different sizes in my people, and I will not hand you an expectation dressed as a hope, because you would carry it and it would be heavy and it might break in your hands. But I will tell you this. I have 11 years of unfiled truths and 1 season of a warmth I did not account for, and I am, whatever my superiors believe, not entirely without recourse of my own. Let me think. Give me the 90 days to think. And do not raise. Do not spend the 90 days grieving a thing that has not yet happened, because that is the one wholly human waste I have never understood and cannot bear to watch you commit. If we have 90 days, then we have 90 meals. Do not lose one of them to a future that is still only a column of numbers that no one has finished adding. He looked at her a long time. 90 meals, he said. 90 meals, she said. And on the 90th, whatever the columns decide, I will have sat unguarded in the company of the one person who ever carried the chair to me, 90 more times, and that will be a thing that happened, Rays, and no dispatch schedule and no accountant 3 years away can make it unhappen. That is the only kind of permanence my people believe in, not the avoidance of the ending, the reality of the thing that was, which the ending cannot touch. Give me the 90 meals. Let me think. And do not grieve yet. So he did not grieve, or he tried not to, and the 90 days began to run down like snow off a roof in a thaw, and every evening the hall emptied and he carried 2 trays to the corner under the dead grill, and the 2 of them ate, and did not speak of the hauler and spoke instead of everything else, of home and the lake and her language and his sister, and the old thing turning over far below the ice, and each meal was a stone laid carefully on top of the last. And both of them knew they were building something they might not be allowed to finish, and both of them, in the manner of their separate kinds, kept laying the stones anyway, because it was the only thing to do with a season that was ending, and because the alternative was to stop, and neither of them now knew how to stop. The 90 days ran down to 9, and then to 3, and on the last full night before the supply hauler was due, the lake broke its long silence. It began as a sound, low and enormous, felt in the chest before it was heard in the ear, a groaning that was not the wind and not the settling of the domes and not any machine the station kept. Jonah was in the mess hall when it came, stacking the last of the trays that would be crated in the morning, and he felt it come up through the deck plates and into the soles of his feet, and he stopped with a tray in his hands and stood very still, the way she had taught him to stand still, and listened. The sound rose and held and fell and rose again, and it came from the lake. Vale was at the eastern observation blister. He knew it before he went to find her, and he was right. She was standing pressed against the transparent dome with both long hands flat on it, and she did not turn when he came in, and her voice when it came was low and doubled and full of something he had never heard in it before, which was awe. "It is rising," she said. "Raise, it is rising." He came to stand beside her and he looked out, and at first he saw only the vast white lid of ice under the hard winter stars, and then he saw that the ice was moving. Far out, over the deep basin, the pewter lid was heaving, buckling in slow, enormous plates, and beneath it, where the ice cracked apart in seams of black water, there was a light, not a bright light. A deep, dim blue-green glow, vast and diffuse, spread out under the ice across an area larger than the whole station, brightening as it rose, and Jonah understood that he was looking at the old thing, the patient thing, the thing that had waited at the bottom of a lake since before his species had language, coming up at last toward the winter stars. "Is it going to hurt us?" he asked, and he was surprised to find that he was not afraid, only that he asked because he thought he ought to. "No," Vale said. "No, Rays, look at it. Look at how it moves. It has waited longer than my whole civilization has existed, and it is rising now tonight on the last night, and it is not hunting and it is not angry. It is answering." Her voice caught. "For 11 years I have logged it as a fault and cleared it, because there was no one to tell and no one who would have cared, and I told myself it was patient, that it was content in its deep, that it did not know it was alone. And I was telling myself about myself, Rays. I was describing my own hollowing and calling it the lake's peace. And now the station is dying and the humans are leaving and the whole long watch is ending, and it has chosen this night to rise. And I think it has been as alone as I have been, and I think it is coming up to see whether anyone is still here." The blue-green glow spread and brightened until the whole eastern sky was lit with it, until the frozen shore and the domes and the dead greenhouses were washed in an underwater light, and behind them, in the station, alarms began to sound. The heaving of the ice was cracking the intake channels. The pumping towers, which drew from the deep basin, were registering pressures they had never been built to register. Somewhere a relay tripped, and then another, and the lights in the blister flickered and went to the dull red of emergency power. And over the station address the director's voice came thin and frightened, ordering all crew to muster at the hauler dock for immediate boarding, ordering the pumping towers shut down, ordering the abandonment of Marin Station a full day ahead of schedule, because a station cannot be crated in the morning if the lake it stands on has begun to come apart in the night. "They're leaving now," Jonah said. "Tonight, listen to him. They're not waiting for morning." "Yes," Vale said. She had not moved from the glass. "Vale." He took her arm, and it was the first time in a whole year that he had touched her without her turning her hand up to meet him, and she felt cold and rigid under his hand, transfixed. "Vale, if they leave tonight, then this is it. The 4 to 7 years starts now, tonight, and the lake's coming apart and you'd be alone on a station that's cracking up over a basin full of that, whatever that is, for years with the power failing. You can't. You have to come to the dock, whatever the rules say. We'll make them take you. I'll carry you onto that ship over my shoulder if I have to." She turned from the glass at last and looked at him in the red emergency light with the blue-green glow of the risen thing washing across her from behind, and Jonah saw that she was weeping, which he had not known the Numa could do, a slow, clear film across her great dark eyes that caught the two lights and held them. "I have thought," she said. "For 90 days I have thought, as I promised you I would. And on the 60th day I filed a report, Rays, the last report I will ever file, and I did a thing in it that a liaison is not permitted to do, which is that I invoked the oldest of my people's laws over the head of every accountant and every dispatcher and every column that ever consigned me to this shore. I declared the lake a thing of the first age. I have the authority to do it, and only the authority to do it once in a life, because my people will spend a fortune and a fleet to answer such a declaration, and they do not forgive it if it is made lightly. I declared it 60 days ago on the strength of 4 cleared faults and a certainty I could not prove, and I have been waiting, terrified to be proven a fool. And tonight, on the last night, the lake has proven me right. That. She lifted one long hand toward the risen glow. That is a thing of the first age, and now that it has shown itself, my declaration is not a fool's error. It is the most important discovery my people have made in 1,000 years, and they will come, raise, not in 7 years, not in 4. They will come as fast as a civilization that does not run hot has ever moved for anything, because I have handed them the oldest living thing anyone has ever found, and I am the one who found it, and I am the one who must be here to receive them when they arrive. Jonah stared at her while the alarms rang and the lake glowed and the station came apart around them. "How fast?" he said. "How fast will they come?" "Months," she said. "Perhaps a year. Not 7. Months, raise, and then this shore will not be a dead station at the bottom of nowhere. It will be a Numa heritage station, the most watched place in this whole sector, with my people coming and going, with the chair no longer empty, with a purpose that is mine and that I made, over the head of everyone who ever filed me away. I will not be alone. That is what I did with the 90 days. I found a way to make the ending not be an ending, and I made it, and tonight the lake made it true." And Jonah understood, all at once and heavy enough to make him grip the cold glass, that she had solved it, that she was not going to be left in the dark for 7 years, that she had reached over the heads of the whole slow machinery that had consigned her, and had bent the future into a shape she could live inside, and that she had done it 60 days ago in silence, without handing him an expectation dressed as a hope, and had carried the terror of it alone so that he would not carry it too. "You did that," he said. "You saved yourself. You didn't wait for anybody to do it. You did it." "I learned it from a hot tray person," she said, and the film across her eyes broke and ran, and the outer corners of them lightened even as they wept. "I learned that one does not wait for the system to become smart enough to be changed. One fools it. One carries the chair oneself. You taught me that, in a corner under a dead grill, one meal at a time, and I have spent it well. But raise." Her hand found his, cold fingers turning up into his warm palm, the old gesture, the trust one. "It solves my ending. It does not solve yours. In 1 hour that hauler leaves, and you are on the manifest, and it is 3 years home, and you came out here for the money and the debt and the whole warm, quick life that is waiting for you on the other side of the dark. My people will come and my chair will fill, and I will not be alone. But the one who filled it first, the one who filled it when no one else in 11 years would, will be 3 years gone, and I do not raise. I do not have the word for that in either of my languages, and I have looked." The station shuddered. Down at the dock, the last of the crews were boarding, and the director's voice was counting names, and somewhere on that manifest was the name Raise, and the hauler's engines had begun their long climb toward departure, and the blue-green light of the oldest living thing anyone had ever found poured in through the blister, and washed over a human and a Numa who stood holding hands over a cracking lake and had run, at last, all the way out of 90 days. "Vale," Jonah said. "Vale, listen to me, look at me." She looked at him. "You said your people don't have a word for goodbye," he said. "You said they only have a word for until, and you said the absence of the first word is a kindness, and the presence of the second is a promise. Say the second one. Say the until." "Raise," she said, "the ship is leaving." "I know it is," Jonah said. "Say the until anyway. And then I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to have said the word first, so you'll know I mean it the whole depth I'm capable of meaning it." And the alarms rang, and the lake glowed, and the great old patient thing rose the last of the way toward the light it had waited an age to see. And in the red and blue-green dark of the observation blister, the alien woman who had eaten 9,000 meals alone said the word in her own language that meant not goodbye but until, low and doubled and layered, the quiet voice trailing the loud one by its half-beat, said it to a person for the first time in 11 years, and meant it as a promise, and waited, with her cold hand in his warm one, to hear what the hot tray person would say back. "I'm not on that ship," Jonah said. The words came out of him plainly, without weight or flourish, the way the truest things always came out of him, and for a moment Vale did not seem to understand them, as though he had spoken in a third language she had never learned. "Rays," she said, "you must be on that ship. It is 3 years home. It is the debt and the money and the warm, quick life. It is everything you crossed the dark to reach." "It was," Jonah said, "before, when I lay awake wondering what the hell I was doing 3 years from anything I'd ever loved. That was before I loved something out here. I told you that a whole season ago, and you didn't hear the whole of it, and neither did I. I don't lie awake anymore, Vale. I stopped the day I carried the first tray across that hall. You want to send me back to lie awake again for 3 years and then a whole life, in a warm, quick house, wondering what the hell I'm doing 3 years from the thing I loved. That's not a rescue. That's the sentence. You solved your ending and you tried to hand me back mine, and I'm telling you I don't want it. I'm not on that ship." The station shuddered around them. Down at the dock the hauler's engines had climbed to a full roar, and the director's voice, thin and frightened, was calling the last names, and among them, twice, unanswered, was the name Rays. "You would be giving up your home," Vale said. Her cold hand had tightened on his. "Your world, your kind, the warm, quick life. For a heritage station on a cracking lake, with a woman who is not of your species and cannot smile the way you smile and will outlive you by a span you cannot imagine. You would be the only human within 3 years of anywhere, Rays. You would be, to my people when they come, a curiosity, a warm, quick thing kept by a liaison, the way Corliss believed I kept you. You have not thought this through. You are a hoping-sized thing, and you are running hot, and you cannot hold still. And in 10 years, in 20, you will wake in the cold and want your own kind, and there will be none, and you will hate what you gave away." "Maybe," Jonah said. "I'm not going to promise you I won't ever wake up and miss home. That'd be a lie, and you'd know it, because you can't lie to somebody you've shared 9,000 meals with. You told me that too. I'll miss it. Some nights it'll be bad. But here's the arithmetic, Vale, and I've done it the way you do it, slow and cold, these last 90 days, because I'm not as much of a hot, quick fool as you like to pretend. On that ship there's a warm world and everyone I ever knew and one empty chair I'll be looking at across every table for the rest of my life. On this shore there's cold and dark, and your people coming and a lake full of something older than language and one chair that isn't empty. And I've eaten enough meals at an empty chair to know which of those is the one you can't live at. You taught me that. It hollows you and leaves you standing. I'm not standing there for you, not when I get to choose. I'm choosing the chair that isn't empty. That's the whole thing. There isn't a bottom to it, it's the top all the way down." She wept, and the outer corners of her eyes lightened, both at once, the whole layered grief and joy of her rising to the surface, and this time not turning away, not submerging, staying up in the light where he could see it. "You would truly stay," she said. "Watch me," Jonah said, and he let go of her hand, and he crossed to the blister's comm panel while the alarms rang and the lake glowed, and he keyed it open, and he said in a voice that did not shake, "Doc, this is Rays. Pull my name off the manifest. I'm not boarding. Marin Station's Numa Heritage designation is active as of tonight, and it needs a standing human caretaker under the joint agreement, and that's me, and it's logged, and you can leave. Get everybody home. I'll mind the lake." There was a silence on the line. Then, unexpectedly, Corliss's flat voice came back, and there was something in it Jonah had never heard the whole 9-year calcified length of it, which was a kind of gruff, startled respect. "You sure about this, Cook?" "Never been surer of anything in my life," Jonah said. "Then somebody had to," Corliss said, which were the same words Jonah had once said about a burnt heel of bread, though Corliss could not have known it, "and I guess it's you. We'll log it. There's a standing caretaker provision in the joint charter, always has been, nobody's ever used it, it's yours if you want it. Supplies, power allocation, relay access, resupply on the yearly hauler. It's a hard road, Rays." A pause. "Take care of it, her. Whichever, take care." And the line closed, and outside, minutes later, the hauler lifted off its cradle on a column of white fire and climbed into the blue-green sky over the risen lake and dwindled and was gone. 3 years toward home, with 200 souls aboard and one name struck off the manifest. And the roar of it faded, and then there was only the wind, and the groaning of the lake, and the two of them, alone on the shore of the oldest water in the sector, alone but not each in the way they had been alone before. The old thing did not come all the way out of the lake that night. It rose until the top of it broke the surface among the shattered plates of ice, a vast dark curve of something that might have been a back or a brow or a shoulder, streaming water that steamed in the cold, glowing its deep patient glow, and it lay there in the broken ice under the winter stars for the better part of an hour while the human and the Numa watched from the blister. And then, slowly, on a schedule of its own, it settled back down into the dark it had risen from. And the glow dimmed and diffused and sank, and the lake began, over the following days, to still and freeze and go once more to its lid of pewter. But it was not the same stillness as before. Vale said so, standing at the glass in the ordinary daylight after, and Jonah believed her, because she knew the lake the way she knew her own hollowed places. "It knows we are here now," she said. It rose and it saw that the station was not entirely abandoned, that 2 were left, and it went back down to wait, but it is a different waiting. It is the waiting of a thing that has been seen. That is a better waiting, Rays. I know the difference exactly. They built the rest of their life at Marin Station, 1 meal at a time, because that was the only way either of them knew how to build anything. The mess hall was too large for 2. So Jonah closed most of it down and kept the corner, the small table under the dead grill, and it stopped being the place where the alien woman ate alone and became, simply, the place where they ate. He cooked better now that he cooked for one person who noticed. He grew things in the one greenhouse he kept lit, real things, green things, and the first time he set a plate in front of her with something on it that had been alive that morning instead of reconstituted from a foil brick. She looked at it for a long moment the way she had looked at the very first hot tray, and then she looked at him, and the outer corners of her eyes lightened, and she said, "You are still doing it, carrying the chair. A whole year and you have not stopped," and he said, "I told you, there's no bottom to it, eat your beans." Her people came in the spring, which is to say in the order of 140 days, which for the Numa was a headlong sprint. A civilization dropping everything and running as it had not run in 1,000 years. Their ship came down out of the sky slow and enormous and silver, and out of it came the Numa, tall and gray-blue and grave and slow, more of them than Jonah had ever imagined existed, and they walked out onto the frozen shore to look at the oldest living thing anyone had ever found, and they found, waiting to receive them, one of their own, straight-backed and steady, who had made the discovery and held the watch. And beside her, small and warm and unafraid, a single young human who had, the record showed, given up his passage home to stand the watch with her. Jonah had braced himself to be a curiosity, a kept thing, a warm, quick oddity the grave, slow visitors would look past the way the station men had looked 6 inches to the left of Vale for 11 years. It did not happen that way. He never fully understood why, until Vale explained it to him that night in their corner, after the visitors had withdrawn to their silver ship. "They know what you did," she said. "It is in the record, the declaration, the discovery, the watch, and beside all of it the thing they cannot get past, the thing they keep returning to. A liaison alone 11 years hollowing, and then a human who fed her, who sat in the chair, who struck his own name off the ship home rather than leave her to the dark. Rays, my people do not have a word for that, and it has undone them quietly in the slow way things undo the Numa. To them, to eat beside another is the oldest and most binding act of trust there is. And you performed it 9,000 times over with one of us freely, for nothing, when none of your own kind and none of mine would. They came here to see the oldest living thing in the sector, and they have found, instead, that the thing they most want to understand is a young warm creature who ran hot and could not hold still and carried a chair across an empty hall. You are not a curiosity to them, Rays. You are the discovery. You always were. I simply found you first." Jonah did not have anything to say to that, so he did the only thing he knew how to do, which was to get up and cross to the warmer and plate 2 servings of the green things he had grown, and carry them back to the small table under the dead grill, and set one down in front of her, and sit down across from her with the other, in the corner that was not empty and had not been empty for a long time now and would not be empty again. They ate together every day for the rest of his life, and it was a long life, longer than a station cook out of the debt worlds had any right to expect, because the Numa who came to the lake looked after the health of the one human among them the way a person looks after the single lamp in a great dark house, and he never missed a meal with her, and she never missed a meal with him, not once in all the years, through every season of the long autumn and the longer winter. Through the coming and going of the silver ships and the slow rising and settling of the old thing in the deep, because he was the one who had cared for her when no one else would, and she had learned from him, one meal at a time, that a chair does not have to be empty, and that loneliness does not have to be the thing you are, and that the truest permanence is not the avoidance of the ending, but the reality of the thing that was, 10,000 meals of it and then 10,000 more, laid down one on top of another, until the stack of them was too tall for any ending to knock over. And when at last, in the fullness of a life well eaten in good company, the human's own long autumn came, Vale sat in the chair across from him, as she had sat 10,000 times, and she did not say goodbye because her people did not have the word, and she said instead the other word, the one that was not goodbye but until, the promised word, low and doubled and layered, the quiet voice trailing the loud one by its half-beat. And out past the domes the great lake lay still under the stars, holding the whole sky on its unmoving surface, and far down in it, the old patient thing turned over and settled in its better waiting, the waiting of a thing that has been seen. And in the corner under the dead grill, the alien woman who had once eaten 9,000 meals alone, finished the last of her 10,000 meals in the company of the only one who had ever carried her the chair, and was not at the end of it, and never would be again, alone.